So great. So we got a production crew. We have a red light. This is great, but the red light was on before he said we could talk.
It was.
So I have no idea how this works. This is so much fun.
Yeah.
So if our lighting changes, it's because our Ace production crew is still practicing, and we're trying different things, and we got these really funky umbrellas. You know you've made it, right?
Yeah, they're so cool.
When you get the umbrella lights, okay? So that's a really good sign. So we're here. This has been an unbelievable week for news. We should introduce ourselves.
We should.
Why don't you start? I always start.
All right. Well, I'm Donny, the flag-burning liberal who's coming for Brett Kavanaugh.
There you go, and I'm Greg Penckless, your ace conservative who's going to keep him from doing stupid things, because that's what conservatives do, at least as much as we can, but since they've taken over the media, it's been a lot more difficult. All right, so we talk about news, we talk about issues, we talk about all kinds of things. We don't really know where the show goes, and that's the beauty of it. But having a liberal person and a conservative person, we haven't really talked about this as much as we should. The nice thing about what we're trying to accomplish here is the fact that we're two people who disagree on pretty much everything, but have some surprising areas where we do agree. And the point is, just because you disagree with someone, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't, things don't, the sky doesn't fall, the earth doesn't stop turning. We just disagree. Yeah. But through that disagreement, I'm learning a tremendous amount. It's interesting to see points of view. I'm getting points of view I never would have thought of before, and it's really kind of fascinating to see how this all works out. So yeah, okay, your turn. I just throw it over. I just do that.
Definitely the most educational show, at least in the area.
We're trying to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kavanaugh got in a little bit of trouble. We gonna talk about that?
We have to talk about Kavanaugh. I've got so many things to say about that.
Me too.
This is going to take a few minutes to really get through this, because my first, and I have so many problems with what's going on. My first problem, and you may actually agree with me on this, is the fact that the Supreme Court is way too important.
Right.
There is no reason that the country should stop on this one person's allegations or accusations. Do you know there's a difference between allegations and accusations? Accusations have some basis, there's some evidence, there's something that actually has been shown. An allegation is nothing. And so this is an allegation at this point. And so what is interesting about this whole thing is that we are so wrapped up in the power of the Supreme Court, and this goes back again to what we've talked about, Marbury versus Madison. I keep bringing this up, and the reason I keep doing that is because the Supreme Court has lost their way, and there's no reason that they have the power that they do have, and there's no reason for us to be fussing over them. This should be just like routine business. This is like 10 times more important than the budget for some reason, and it shouldn't be. So the first problem I had was the actual process, that the Supreme Court people themselves have way too much power.
I'm inclined to agree with you there. I bet you that's about to stop, though.
What's about to stop?
The agreement.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought you meant the Supreme Court hearings. So they're not. Well, you do that a lot, and that's okay. So I didn't say I was the smartest guy on the planet. Maybe second, but certainly not the fastest. But yeah, exactly. But yeah, I was reminded of something. One of our Ace production crew reminded us that occasionally I miss cues that you throw out. One of them, and he knows exactly what I'm going to say next. Right? Apparently, we were explaining the Rubio break, which is the water break that Senator Marco Rubio took during a response at the State of the Union message, and I asked you to explain it, and I promptly just explained it right afterwards. So apparently there's a nice little arrow pointing at you in one of the videos, but the look on your face was priceless, so just to let you know. Okay, so again, if this is where the disagreement stops, this is fine. The second problem I have is with the whole process here, and these allegations came after the hearings were over, before the vote. Suspending the vote without a way to take it up in the hearings. It looks bad. It looks like it was planned. It looks like it was scheduled. It looks like this is a whole choreographed, orchestrated way to delay the hearings, to delay Kavanaugh, to delay him beyond the midterms. Hopefully the Senate would then go Democrat as far as the Democrats are concerned. I know that's what you want, obviously, right? And so what happened from that is then it didn't matter who Trump would appoint. You guys wouldn't take him anyway, and he'd have to find some kind of compromise middle ground person like Merrick Garland, and we'd be right back where we started from. But that's the problem I have, is that it's not really a legitimate way of going about this. This procedure, so the Supreme Court is bad because they have too much power. This procedure is bad because it came at the wrong time. It came at the worst possible time, on purpose, so that the hearings, so the confirmation, the hearings were over, and the vote couldn't go forward. That's my problem.
Well, I got a couple problems with the way that for the most part, conservatives and even some liberals as a whole have responded to this.
Okay.
So, first of all, as far back as 2012, possibly even earlier, it's been confirmed she told her husband, her therapist, all that. I highly doubt in 2012 anyone was thinking, let's come up with this right now so that we can put down Brett Kavanaugh if he's ever nominated for the Supreme Court. No one ever expected that. And so that's the first problem.
Okay.
Second one is there's all sorts of memes. You know, I've seen you've shared a few, which is okay.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm just blatant. You
Lot
know,
of
some
our-
of the stuff I'm putting out. We'll get to that in a little
Yeah.
bit. So
A lot
go to
of
my
our
actual. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
A lot of our other right-wing friends have been sharing them, and they're really just downplaying the seriousness of the accusation. I mean, whether or not it actually happened, I personally think it did. This is something a lot of girls
Based
in
on
that
what?
age group go through.
Based on what? Based on why do you think it happened?
Well, there's the fact that she's been talking about it for a while. There's the fact that she passed a lie detector test. And here's my big one, the fact that she's demanded that it be investigated properly before she goes and speaks. That is not a sign of a liar.
How do you know? Of course it's a
Yeah,
sign of a liar. It's a
she's-
great ploy. Well, I don't know about the lie detector test. And I don't know.
Mm.
First of all, we don't know what the questions were that she was asked.
I'll give you
And
that.
why do you give a lie detector test to the victim? That doesn't make any sense. Unless you're trying to prove that it's it's either a false accusation or not. And I don't know if that necessarily would do that. And I don't necessarily want victims going through lie detector tests.
Right.
Just put that. But you mentioned a couple of things here. She mentioned it to her therapist, which is confidential. Right? That's privileged information. That's not supposed to come out. Mentioned it to her husband. But here's the problem too. Brett Kavanaugh has been on the Court of Appeals for 15 years. Why, if this person is so horrible, did this horrible thing to her back in high school, why didn't she bring it out over the last 15 years? Why now? Why now when he's going for the Supreme Court? In fact, if he was not going to the Supreme Court, would she have just kept this whole thing secret? So if it was such a big deal to her, why wouldn't she bring it out regardless of what Brett Kavanaugh was doing in his life? Because it's not what he's doing in his life that matters, it's what she's doing in her life. If she was a victim, if she was attacked in some way or groped or all the other things, and I got some quotes we'll get to in a bit here, as to what actually happened, then she's not behaving like a victim at all. It doesn't make sense. And here's another point I wanted to bring out too. Why is this going before the Senate? The Senate is not law enforcement. If you have a crime against you, if someone sexually assaults you, you don't go to the U.S. Senate with it. You go to the police department. Okay? You go to the state police. You go to you go to the detectives in law enforcement. Apparently, I just heard tonight, there's no statute of limitations on this. She could go back to the Maryland law enforcement authorities, and she should. But she shouldn't be in the U.S. Senate with this thing. It's not a Senate issue.
Well,
it's a law enforcement issue.
It was passed to the FBI. And
They have no jurisdiction. It's
The
no federal-
precedent is when something like this happens, they investigate it. They also investigated Clarence Thomas.
Well, they
So-
investigate everybody. But here's
Right.
what I found out too. I was listening to Dan Bongino, former Secret Service. The FBI, they do two things. They do background checks, they do history of crime, and they do special investigations. I actually went through a clearance myself once because I served briefly with U.S. Customs before they became Customs and Border Protection. So I went through this whole security process, the whole background check, so I know how this works, all right? And they're very thorough, and they do all kinds of things, and they talk to your friends, and they go through all this stuff. But the FBI refused to investigate this again because they've already done 6 investigations, okay? But, I don't want to get into just the facts of this, because the facts are out there in the news, but I just want to know, perception-wise, and because the whole point of the show is to try to reach beyond the obvious of what's going on, and we don't want to just recite the facts again, because each of us is going to have a whole set of facts that's not going to really help us. But why now? And I think, quite honestly, this is it's not only damaging the confirmation process, it's actually damaging the Democrats. And because the problem, as a conservative, when I look at what the Democrats are doing, I don't believe a word the Democrat Party says anymore. I don't believe any of these accusations, because we had accusations when Jim Jordan was running for, as soon as he announced for Speaker of the House. All of a sudden, all these sexual misconduct, sexual assault claims came up, but they've gone away. Okay, why? Because he's not up right yet for the election. They'll be back, when the vote is getting closer. Well, that's wrong. That's wrong to have your accusations made to have the maximum effect against somebody politically. Either they're real accusations, in which case they should be made immediately and followed up on, all right? Or they're purely political, And they shouldn't be made at all. And that's what it really looks like. It looks like Democrats are making purely political accusations. Trump had the same thing, yet the women disappeared after the election. Roy Moore had a ton of allegations and accusations against him, which have all gone away after the election.
So I wouldn't say they've gone away.
What do you know of any active cases?
Well, not necessarily, but all of them were past the statute of limitations that I know of.
Yeah.
I mean, the point in that case wasn't to get him on trial. It was to get this person who had allegedly hurt them not elected.
Yeah, but he'd been elected to other offices before. So why it's very selective.
And here's
the elections that are kind of picked for this.
But here's where it all comes back to is that before all of this, we didn't have the Me Too movement. I mean, this was back when these people who have since been exposed, both on the local level and on the national level, were just operating with impunity. No one knew they could speak up against them. Things like what Kavanaugh allegedly did were treated like commonplace and just something they should get over.
But women have been speaking up for years and years and years, on these things. You go back to Anita Hill, which I think was staged also. But there have been, when someone's assaulted, I mean, there are claims against them. Now, granted, I believe the climate's a lot better and people are more willing to listen. They're also more willing to listen to men who've been sexual misconduct claims against guys, and that's something that your generation is going to have a better thing to deal with, because my generation was raised to be strong protectors, don't cry, the whole bit, no emotions, and be really tough, and to have to be in a position to have to admit that there was some kind of sexual misconduct that was done is hard for a lot of guys of different generations to do. So in that respect, feminism has actually, this is kind of a weird thing to say, feminism has actually allowed the next generation of guys to be able to report things that a previous generation could not have, because we were not raised, it's not in our personality, in our psyche, in our makeup to do that. It's almost like admitting defeat to have to do that. But if some guy's like whacked with some object in his sleep or assaulted, that's domestic abuse.
Right. Most
guys wouldn't report that. Now they're going to say, look, and I got the bruises to prove it. Here's the divorce case, okay? So things are very different now, whereas guys beforehand wouldn't have said that. They've hid, they would have, done whatever they did. So Me Too. We need to do a special on that.
Yeah, before we really get into that,
okay.
And I would just like to say, America as a whole owes Anita Hill an apology.
No, I don't think so. What apology for what?
Republicans and Democrats alike absolutely railroaded her. I mean, victim shamed her.
She became she's still touring the nation lecturing off the Clarence Thomas hearings. She was a professor. She was unknown. She was just plucked from nowhere to make this hearing with Clarence Thomas. I believe Clarence Thomas, it was a high-tech lynching. It was a coordinated effort from the Democrat Party, the leftist media, Anita Hill, and a bunch of other folks to get Clarence Thomas off the bench. Now you'll notice when liberals, even if conservatives don't like a liberal candidate, they'll try and argue on the merits. And this is where the Democrat Party has disgusted me, because they won't argue. They'll try and argue on the merits, but they'll also try and delay the hearings. They'll also bring about these accusations after the hearings are over. It's like when Trump ran for president. You had the recount thing. You had people trying to change their electoral college votes. You had all these things that were going on afterwards to try and deny Trump the election, trying to say that only the popular vote counted, whereas in our country, in a constitutional republic, the popular vote is meaningless. It's a state vote. You vote by state, which is a good thing. We can argue the merits of that later, but the point, and we should, but the point is that it's not, you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. This from Hillary. I know you're not a Hillary fan, so we can talk about this. But this from Hillary, who rigged the election for herself, okay, which is a real crime. Which is and that's another problem too. And so it's like the rigging of the election against Bernie Sanders, the rigging of the hearing against Brett Kavanaugh. And I'm not a Brett Kavanaugh fan. In fact, if you have a point to make, I'll go into some of the video that I made before we started this one.
Yeah, I just want to say, it seems like in these cases, the only people who are ever punished for doing even the slightest thing wrong are the Democrats.
How are the Democrats punished?
John Conyers, I'll give you, did a terrible thing, instantly had to go. Meanwhile, the Trumps, the Roy Moores, all that of the Republican Party are protected. Bill Clinton had a consensual affair, and all the Kirsten Gillibrands of the party turned their backs on him. Al Franken touched a bulletproof vest, and instantly had to go.
That's a great line. That's really good. Touches a bulletproof vest. I've seen the picture, yeah. And granted, under and a lot of this, the reason a lot of things like Al Franken came out because it was discovered, because the picture went public.
Right.
If these things hadn't gone public, which raises an interesting question: how many of these things don't we know about? How many people, like Cory Booker, I just found out tonight, wrote an article way back when where he actually admitted sexually assaulting a teenager.
Wow.
Several years ago. Yeah. And so the talk show host said, well, why doesn't Cory Booker recuse himself from the hearing and get off the Judiciary Committee? So it raises another whole interesting question of where does this end? Where, does your past, because nobody's been perfect. Have I been absolutely perfect in all my relationships? No. I kind of suck at relationships, actually.
Right.
Otherwise, I'd probably have one. But, it's for some of us out here, it's a rather difficult thing to do. But does that mean that my entire life history has to be paraded out? Every stupid thing I've ever said, everything I ever regret doing, everything, and of course, the longer you live, the more of these you have, right? And so you think back, or like I can remember some of my high school parties, and they were a long time ago, 40 years ago.
Right.
Your high school parties weren't that far away. Is there anything, and you don't have to, I don't want details, but is there anything that you ever did at a party that you probably don't want the world to know?
Me personally, no, but I will say that I saw some things at high school parties.
Okay.
And that's why I feel inclined to believe, her name's Ford, right? Dr. Ford?
Christina Ford.
Christina Ford, yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. And we had parties too. And most of my parties, that's kind of funny, most of my parties were band parties. And so, if the question ever came out to me, what happened, it's interesting because the band parties, we all knew each other. We were all friends. If anybody was being anything from picked on to victimized to attacked, we would have been on them so fast.
Right.
Because we were all friends. So we had it was an artificially secure environment. Whereas if you have an open party where you just have the students, it's a whole different situation. So, and of course I remember fraternity parties. You'll get to those. Those we can't talk about. And of course, then there was band camp. This one time, this several times at band camp. There's a reason we don't tell band camp stories. But think about that. There are a lot of politicians and officials in government of different places and people and CEOs who went to band camp in college. Okay, does everything they ever did, have to come out? And at some point, we're going to have to think about a line here. Now, accusations of sexual misconduct is a definite thing.
Right.
Those things should be coming out. But this is why we have statutes of limitations. So, at what point do you think that a 35-year-old allegation against Brett Kavanaugh, when he's been in a position of government power for a long time, was justified after the hearings ended?
Well, where I draw the line for it, whenever it happens.
Okay, don't answer my question. That was a yes or no question.
Well, I'm saying yes, it should, because where I draw the line is rape and child molestation. If at any point that happened, you deserve anything that's coming for you. If you did it.
Unless it's a false accusation.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing if he did it.
Having been falsely accused during a divorce proceeding, which I will not go into a whole lot of detail of, basically, but the thing is, I understand what a false accusation is like.
Right.
Okay? And I met it head on. I said, go ahead. I called their bluff, is basically what I did. And nothing ever came of it because I called their bluff. But a lot of guys might have wimped out. And here's one of the problems, too. Men are assumed guilty, especially white men, especially white conservative men, especially white conservative Republican men. You've got ads going out now from Democrat women who are saying, I believe, Christina, he's guilty, and if he's not guilty, he has to prove his innocence. That's not how this country works. Which leads to our next discussion. How long have we been going here? Do we think we got like 15, 20 minutes or so, or do we really know?
You've actually been going about 17, 18 minutes right now.
Okay.
So
Let's take a little. I'm going to sort of break these up a little bit here because we're going to come back to this. But I want to talk about guilty until proven. Or you want to keep going? What do you think?
Actually, that's pretty interesting because it ties into It ties into Keith Ellison, which also could go into our last discussion.
Let's keep going then. All right. So, and because I'm going to even relate this to the French Revolution by the time we're done. There's a lot of ground I want to cover here. So let's just keep this. We'll make this the Kavanaugh video.
Yes.
Let's do that. Okay. So you notice how we work these things out as we're going. This is how we do. This is why it's unedited, unrehearsed, unscripted. And that way that you're not missing anything because we're not trying to shade or cover our opinions. But innocent until proven guilty is a concept concept that seems to be lost when it's women accusing men of an issue of an assault like this. Okay, that's not right. We don't operate that way in this country. We have due process. We have the right to face our accusers. Now, I know back in the founding father days they were thinking of men accusing men because it was it was a male-dominated society. Right. We know that. Okay, so I'm not trying to deny that. But now we're not. Now we're at least as close as we're trying to be an equal society, even though women don't have to register for the draft yet. That's another topic. Anyway, but the point is, why in areas of sexual misconduct, assault, rape, child molestation, things like that, which are horrible, are men assumed guilty? That is a problem, and that's why this is having so much effect now, more so than if it were a man coming up saying that Brett Kavanaugh, they got in a fight and he beat him nearly to death, say, for example. Okay, that would not carry the weight, even though it's a serious crime, that this is carrying now because this is a woman.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Okay.
I mean, I don't like the idea of guilty until proven innocent, but I also don't like the way we used to do things, in which everything was just swept under the rug.
That's true.
It was seen as, oh, you'll ruin his life, or, you know.
And that's wrong too.
He's just being a boy. He's just a kid. That's what they're saying about Kavanaugh that I really don't like.
I'm not saying he's just a kid.
Right.
But it's interesting, though, this allegedly occurred when he was 17. So one of the memes I posted on Facebook was, why isn't this being handled as if he were a juvenile? Because he was a minor at that particular point. But I'll tell you a related case. Do you remember the college case in Stanford?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a horrible case. This was, and this is the other extreme. And this is where this isn't a Republican Democrat kind of issue, but it's definitely a problem where this rich college kid. I sound like a liberal here. Anyway, rich, but it's true. He was his rich college kid. I mean, the trust fund baby, basically, raped this poor woman, left her by a dumpster.
Right.
And the judge said, "Well, we can't ruin this young man's career." Well, I'm sorry. That decision was already made.
Exactly.
You know, when he raped this woman and left her. Okay, you don't come back from that. That's not an accident. That's not, getting a little carried away and saying, oh, I'm sorry, gee, I really didn't mean to do, that kind of thing. Or someone like backs off, or someone says, no, that's as far as we're going. And guys like, okay, that's different. This was rape, and this was proven. And the judge, who I think should have been. Now, do you know what happened with the judge?
They finally got rid of him.
They got rid of the judge. Okay,
yeah.
good. So
there's a whole movement.
All right.
Finally.
So that's good. Okay. So what we need to do is find the balance between overprotecting someone who was already convicted, all right, and over convicting somebody who doesn't even have any evidence against them. That's the problem. All right.
That's what you mean.
Okay.
So that ties in perfectly to Keith Ellison. I think that's something we both want to talk about.
Let's talk about Keith Ellison.
So
I got more here, but let's talk about Keith Ellison.
Until I see this video, I think he's innocent.
Okay.
This woman who made the allegation.
You better explain what Keith Ellison. Why we're talking about this.
Big Bernie Sanders guy running for Attorney General of Michigan. Almost became the DNC chair and then became the second in command. Well, anyway, his ex-girlfriend came out and said that he
open
beat her.
borders, Muslim advocate, anti-American, horrible person. He wants to be Attorney General. This guy doesn't even know the laws of this country.
I hope he wins.
There we go. And that's what makes us different.
But anyway, his ex-girlfriend said that he beat her and that there's a video. So, of course, honestly, being a big fan of Keith Ellison, I was skeptical from the start, but I figured, okay, if
Did you presume him innocent?
I didn't figure either way. I figured if there's proof, I'll go with it. If
because
not,
you can't presume him innocent and presume Brett Kavanaugh guilty simply because Keith Ellison you like and Brett Kavanaugh you don't.
I agree.
Okay, and yet that's what millions of Americans are doing. There are millions of Americans right now that have presumed Brett Kavanaugh guilty because they don't like him. Okay, I don't like him either. I don't like anybody in the Supreme Court. I want to reform the whole thing. But I'm not going to convict him based on evidence where the woman who's accusing him doesn't even remember where the party, what happened, who was there. He doesn't even remember being there. And so there's all this sketchy stuff. This is why this is going to be really tough to investigate. And if they want to investigate it, great. But let's get the confirmation done because that's what's next in the order of procedure. But Keith Ellison, and the same thing. Okay.
Yeah. So she said she was going to release this video, and then a few days later she issued this big statement. I never intended to release the video. I just expected to be heard. I'm not required to prove it to anyone. You made an allegation. Yeah. You kind of have to prove it.
Yeah, you do, and that means going to court, and that's one of the problems of a free society. the reason we don't wrongly convict people at the ridiculous levels that the rest of the world does is because you are innocent until proven guilty. There is due process. You do have to present evidence. And this is why, we're one of the advantages of being a republic over democracy, okay? And this is something when the Democrats push for more democracy, I keep saying, well, let's go back to the Constitution. Some of the things that you'd lose would be due process, freedom of the press, freedom of the other things, because they could be voted away in a democracy. So what you probably want is more of a democratic republic.
Yes.
And I understand that. That makes sense. And we can disagree on how to go about doing that. But I don't think you want to give up the basic protections that form a Republican government that state clearly in the Constitution the rights of due process that we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So when we take the case of Keith Ellison, who's a Democrat, who's been accused of sexual assault, domestic violence, and Brett Kavanaugh, who's been accused of sexual misconduct and assault, you can't judge them based on their politics and what job they're going for. Okay. You can't. In fact, I wrote a bill. At some point, we're going to get back to the Action Radio stuff. Action Radio is my idea for radio, where we actually turn you folks into a citizen legislature, and you help us write bills, and we get them to legislators. But one of the bills I had was on election disclosure. Any claim that anybody makes against a politician, within 90 days of an election or a confirmation, has to be maintained after the election or confirmation, or it would be considered vote fraud or election fraud. Okay, and I think that's a reasonable thing to do, especially on these 30 and 35-year-old allegations. You could make them any time from when it happened until now. You can't time an allegation. You can't wait. That's like that's not justice. That's revenge. It's like, I want to take the most revenge on this person for something that happened decades ago. So I'm going to wait until they're being confirmed for the Supreme Court to bring it out. That's wrong. What do you think?
Like I said, I'm not going to say whether or not he's innocent. I just definitely think she deserves to be heard.
I think she deserves to be heard too, but I also think he deserves to be confirmed. And I still don't like him. This is the funny part. All right, let me go ahead.
One more thing, and then I'll let you move on. I know you've been trying to do for a while.
That's okay.
But my boy Bill Nelson.
We don't have a schedule here.
My boy Bill Nelson, who was in trouble with some of the Democrats because he said he was considering confirming him.
I want you to call him that to his face.
I will.
My boy Bill Nelson, Senator Nelson, who's what, 75 or something like that?
But anyway, he said he came out and said that what he wants to do is investigate it and then see what happens, but depending on that. And I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Well, as far as confirmation? No, it's not. It's not reasonable. It should have been done ahead of time. It should have been done with the 6 investigations already. It should have been done, back when he was an appellate judge. It should have been done when he first, it should have been done a long time before this. And so we're just going to disagree on that one.
Yeah.
And I think we presented it fairly well.
Could always appoint Merrick Garland again. That's all I have to say about that.
No, actually, and it's interesting. I mean, I'll be quite honest. Mitch McConnell railroaded that nomination out. But I got a question for you. I want to, this is where I get theoretical at times, all right? So the Constitution says, and by and with, which is a rather unusual combination of words. And by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, okay, when it comes to nominating a Supreme Court justice. So to me, and by means at the same time.
Right.
Means together. With means together also. So if you're doing something and by and with, you're doing it together. So the only way I can think of a consent is what happens after something happens, right? So your nomination, the Senate then gives their consent or not. Their advice is something before something happens. So it seems to me the way the Constitution's written, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, means that the Senate gives their advice ahead of time. In other words, saying, here's a list of 20 people that we're giving advice to the president on. These are the people we think should be Supreme Court justice. Can you pick one from this 20? And if not, we'll give you 20 more. Okay? That would be advice ahead of time. The president would then say, okay, yeah, number 4, that looks good. This will be my nominee. I have to do the vetting and all the other kind of stuff. So I've taken your advice. I've selected a person from within who you've given. Now, will you confirm that person? And then we go through the regular confirmation process. That, to me, sounds like a more constitutional way of nominating and confirming a Supreme Court justice than having the president pick anybody they want and then sticking the Senate with that choice. It's like the Senate's lost their advice power. They have their consent power, but they don't have their advice power. That's the way I read the Constitution.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, on the one hand,
Well,
I don't like the idea of it having to be someone on that list, but on the other, I do think we need to go back to that Because as you said, the Senate definitely should be advising on it.
I think it should do it ahead of time. I really do, and that would make sense for a Democrat with a Senate with a Republican president, or the other way around.
Right.
You know, or even the same party. Now, Trump has done the unusual thing. He's actually published his list ahead of time. Anybody criticizes him, well, they criticize Trump for anything. But what's interesting is he actually did that. So in that way, he can get advice from the Senate, because the Senate can then take that list of 20 people that he's already published and said, you know what, we like 12 of them. So if you want to pick, in fact, this would be a good way to do that. We'll have to talk to, when we get Congressman Gates in here, which we're hoping to do for one of our interviews, that'd be something to ask him. Is it, now that the president's already published a list, why doesn't the Senate pick from that list, you know, somewhere around 10 or 12 and say, these are the people who we think we would like to put through the confirmation process? Then the president could then pick one for them. I think we'd have better Supreme Court justices, quite honestly.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Do you think that would lessen the confrontation that goes into the hearings?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. You know what we have to do? We have to write a bill on this.
We have to write a bill.
We have to write a bill. Okay, we have to write a bill. So which means you guys have to give us your advice and consent for how we write this bill, changing the nomination and confirmation process for the Senate. For the Supreme Court. So if you like that idea, you know, you can go to writeyourlaws.com, which is our citizen bill writing website. You can write a bill yourself. You can send us a message on our Greg and Donny News Show YouTube channel. You can go to the Greg and Donny News Show Facebook page. You can put all these things on there, ideas for that. But I think it would make for, and I'll get those to Congressman Gates, and then he can pass it on to the Senate folks. I don't have the connections with our senator. You could get it to Senator Bill Nelson. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. And from there, we could see what. Oh, we got the cat going back again. Remember the cat from the last video? If you don't know the cat from the last video, watch the last video. Okay, so that's how that works out. All right, now, I got a couple more points to make on this, because we've covered a bunch of things here. But the biggest one, and where did I put this down here? I got this whole big list of stuff here. I want to talk about the French Revolution and the American War for Independence, and the differences between them, and how that relates to the Kavanaugh. This just came to me at dinner. I made this big salmon salad with, you know, alfalfa sprouts. It was real California food, right?
You know, I've
go ahead.
always loved this subject.
What?
The comparison between the two revolutions. That's always been one of my favorite things to talk about.
Wow. Have you looked at academic credit for what we're doing here, by the way?
Not yet. I need
should.
to.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking too is, I think are you in a history or American government or some kind of class like that? Can you present our videos to the class, especially the one I forgot to talk about, which is my rant on the constitutionality of Brett Kavanaugh? Do you think, because that'd be kind of fun. I'd love to get the feedback from your classmates as to what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll talk to my professor.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Go ahead, what?
I'm only taking 2 classes. We have American government and American history, so I could probably do it in both.
Yeah, I used to take like 5 classes. I graduated with 2 degrees. You know, I was just stupid enough to do an academic overload. Okay, so it looks like we have our next guest. Hi, we're making a video. Have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. We're on a rant. So back to the French Revolution. Now here's the reason I want to bring up the French Revolution is because, you know, what they did that was so different than what we did. What we did was establish due process. We've talked about our rights. The 4th through the 8th Amendment, probably the 4 most important amendments when it comes to judicial procedure. And what's interesting is that the Bill of Rights, you know, almost half of it is concerned with rights of the accused, which I find quite fascinating itself, which goes against the British, which would have what they call general warrants. So they would issue a general warrant. They could search anybody for anything. And of course, the British would say, well, if you have nothing to hide, don't worry about it. Okay. So that's why that expression is meaningless in a free republic. Okay. It's not a question of what you have to hide. It's what the question of what the government can prove. All right. So what the French used to do with Madame Guillotine, all right, if you were accused, you were guilty. And if you can prove your innocence, your head came off. Okay. Thousands of people were executed in revolutionary France based on the principle that we are heading for now. We're not there yet, obviously, not even close. But if you extend what's going on, if you extend the guilty until proven innocent idea, if people are making commercials that Brett Kavanaugh is already guilty, he shouldn't be on the Supreme Court, where this eventually leads is a French Revolution where people are executed for stupid reasons. You know, they make too much money. They're rich. You know, I don't like him. He's a white guy. We have enough white guys in the Supreme Court. Let's execute him and then bring up somebody else, you know, a person of color. Of course, that makes us persons of no color. We're going to have that chat one day, too, because I got a whole rant on that. But anyway, but think about it, though.
Yeah.
Where does this lead if we get rid of our presumption of innocence? You know, where it leads ultimately, the extreme, the worst possible case is the French Revolution, where people were guillotined for virtually no reason at all. That's my fear. People say it can't happen here. Well, we've got plenty of examples of history of things that couldn't happen that did. So that's what I want to say about that. I think we're about. Okay, I've ranted. Have you ranted enough?
I think I've ran it
In
up.
Kavanaugh? So we have. Oh, I forgot one more thing. I made a video that I want you to go back and check out because the most important 7 minutes of the Kavanaugh hearing were completely overlooked by the media. So I want you to go back a couple of videos. It's me at Mission Control, basically in my room. And I've got the computer set up, and I have my computer a little too bright. I'm sorry. I'll learn that for next time. I'll get better at this. But the point was, I had Senator Lindsey Graham interviewing Brett Kavanaugh, talking about the Constitution in a way that absolutely stunned and shocked me. And what was so shocking about it was the unlimited power that the Supreme Court has given themselves to write their own rights, and saying that only a constitutional amendment could overturn them rather than legislation, which is proper, or juries, which is proper. So what Marbury versus Madison ultimately did, and this is something we need to explore further. I think did a cat sneeze under my desk?
No.
Oh, that was you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, fine. So that's not such a good roll too. That's all right. Anyway, we're easily distracted here. But we just roll right along. So what it did was it set up this this horrible situation when Marbury versus Madison was passed. It established precedents, and Kavanaugh can't get out of bed without a precedent. Okay, he can't breathe without he won't do anything without a precedent. So it established a precedent that one, juries would no longer have the power of jury nullification. The judges would do it for them. Juries wouldn't even learn of their power of that. And it also established that the judiciary could make up whatever power they wanted for themselves. And those are two of the most dangerous precedents. And that's not actually in the decision. They didn't write that down. Okay, this is the effect of what's happened. And so I went through this wonderful examination by Lindsey Graham with Brett Kavanaugh. And this is why I'm not a Kavanaugh fan. But again, I'm not any Supreme Court person fan. How do you think we could find a Supreme Court justice that would not use judicial review, knowing that Marbury versus Madison is unconstitutional?
That's a good question. My ideal justice is Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, you're going to have to explain that one. Because?
I mean,
our production crew just left.
Yeah. Well, she's the one thing standing between people who are set to have their rights taken away and having their rights taken away.
Do you have a decision that I could look up that she made that would really sort of show she was protecting rights?
The gay marriage decision, the abortion
That's
debate.
illegal. Those are both illegal decisions. The Supreme Court has no power to rule on those things. They can't make law. Remember the Constitution, Article 1, all legislative power rests with the Congress, which means no legislative power rests with the judiciary or the executive. The executive cannot make rules which have the effect of law. That is unconstitutional. The judiciary cannot make orders. They cannot make injunctions. They cannot make anything that makes law or policy. All they can do is settle cases under law and under the Constitution. And that's my rant for that.
Right. And I do agree with you there.
Oh, good.
But
Thank you. Because I did that so well, too.
Right.
Yeah, okay, fine.
the justices of the past, as we've talked about, just kind of got that all messed up.
Yeah, they did.
So in the modern world, they're really just working with what they have. And I agree we need to start fixing that.
Yeah.
But until we start fixing it, again, they're just working with what they have.
Yeah, I'm going to give Congressman Gates a little preview. That's one of the first questions we ask when we get you here in the hot seat is judicial reform, and how do we get to a non-judicial review Supreme Court? It's almost like you have to appoint people that use judicial review to counter other people using judicial review for their own purposes.
Right.
And unfortunately that works both ways. So the Democrats are appointing liberal Democrat justices to use judicial review to counter what they see as horrible conservative decisions. Conservatives are appointing conservative activist judicial review judges to counter what they see are horrible liberal decisions. They're both wrong. That's not the way this is supposed to operate. I'm done.
Yep, definitely need a reform there.
Okay, so there's our Kavanaugh debate for today. So we'll have our production crew put down the cat. Come on back, turn off the camera, and we have a guest to get to. So we're going to be with you in just a little. He's not here. We got to keep talking.
We do.
Yeah, here we have it's perfectly arranged to end, and we can't. So we're going to. He doesn't care. This guy doesn't care about himself. We're so formal here. See, this is why we don't have a boss. We don't have a production crew. We don't have the guy with the with the headphones in the back room going camera 1, 2, 3. Because we don't care. We're just yeah. All right, we're done. Shut us down. All right, we'll be back. Oh, Greg and Donny News Show, Greg and Donny News Show Facebook page, Greg and Donny News Show YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please like us. And he's Donny. I'm Greg. And we'll be back.